Tell me he's okay. Shen Yue arrives in tears after news of Wangibore's collapse. The hospital smelled like fear. Not the type you read about in books or see on television. This was real. Palpable. Heavy. It lingered in the hallways. Hung low in the waiting rooms. And pressed against every wall like a presence that could not be seen. Only felt. Xiao Zhan had not slept for more than 2 minutes at a time since they brought Wangibore in. He had sat by the hospital bed for what felt like days. Unmoving. Unwavering. His fingers locked tightly around Yibo'S hand. And every few hours he would whisper the same thing over and over. Come back to me. Please come back. Doctors came and went. Nurses adjusted the machines. Fluids were administered. Vital signs recorded. But still. No movement from Yibo'. Just silence. Soft beeping. And the occasional shift of the heart monitor that reminded everyone he was still alive. Barely. It was during the 26th hour that a nurse burst into the hallway. Her voice loud. Urgent. As she waved a phone in the air and called out to Xiao Zhan. Someone is outside. She says she has to see him now. She is crying and refusing to leave. She said her name is Shen Yue. Xiao Zhan froze. Shen Yue had not been seen in public with Wang Yibo'S in months. Not since the rumors. Not since the private footage leaked. Not since the world learned the truth about Wang Yibo'S relationship with Xiao Zhan. And not since their daughter's identity was nearly exposed. But somehow. She had heard. The nurse ran back down the hallway. Xiao Zhan stood slowly. His legs weak. His heart pounding. He walked toward the hallway. Past the cold walls and polished floors. Until he reached the private wing entrance. And there she was. Shen Yue. Hair tied back in a knot that had clearly been rushed. Eyes swollen from crying. Hands shaking. She was wearing an oversized sweatshirt and mismatched slippers. Nothing about her was staged or prepared. She looked like someone who had just watched her whole world break. Xiao Zhan opened the door. And Shen Yue looked at him. Like she was seeing someone she once knew but had lost long ago. Is he alive? She asked before anything else. Her voice cracked. Low. Barely holding together. Xiao Zhan nodded. But just barely. He has not woken up. He moved a little yesterday. But he has not opened his eyes. She covered her mouth. Trying not to scream. And then without asking. She rushed past him and into the room. When she saw Yibo' lying on the hospital bed. Pale. Still. Surrounded by machines. She stopped breathing. Oh my God. She whispered it again and again as she walked to the edge of the bed. Her hands reached for the railing. Her knees nearly gave out. And then she collapsed into the chair beside him. Xiao Zhan stood by the door. Watching. There had been no real closure between the three of them. Not after what happened. Not after the fights. Not after the misunderstanding that shattered everything. But now. Seeing her break like this. Hearing her sob over the man they both loved in different ways. It did something to him. He closed the door gently. Walked toward the opposite side of the bed. Sat down. And for the first time in nearly 2 days. He said nothing. Let her speak. Let her cry. He owed her that much. Shen Yue took Wangibore's hand in hers. Rubbed her thumb gently over his skin. Then leaned close. I know I was angry. I know I stopped answering your messages. But I never stopped caring. I was hurt. But I never wanted this. She sniffled. Wiped her face with her sleeve. And continued. I always told you that you worked too hard. That you were carrying too much. That pretending to be fine was not the same as being fine. And you always said. I know. But I have to. She turned to Xiao Zhan. Did he ever say that to you? I know. But I have to. Xiao Zhan nodded. Tears filled his eyes again. Yes. He always said that. He said it the night before he collapsed. Shen Yue pressed her forehead to the bed rail. Then said softly. He was always trying to be more than he needed to be. For fans. For the industry. For his family. For you. For me. For your daughter. She looked up. Eyes locked with Xiao Zhan's. He never wanted to disappoint any of us. The silence that followed felt different. It was not heavy. Not sharp. It was quiet in a way that allowed pain to sit beside peace. For a moment. The two people who had loved Wangibore in ways only they could understand sat side by side, each holding on to a piece of him, each letting go of their anger. Shen Yue stood finally, walked to Xiao Zhan, and reached into her bag. I brought this. It's old. But I think he'll remember it. She pulled out a small music box. Wangibore had gifted her during their first drama together. The song that played was one he used to hum in rehearsals. She placed it on the bedside table, opened it, and let the melody fill the room. The notes were slow, sad, but strangely comforting. Xiao Zhan reached for Wangibore's hand, placed it between both of his, and whispered again. You are not allowed to leave. Do you hear me? You're not done yet. Shinyu stepped outside the room, needing air, needing space. But she paused in the hallway, pressed her back to the wall, and allowed herself to cry again. She thought of the times she and Yibor stayed up late after filming. Of the day he called to say he had fallen in love with someone unexpected. Of the moment she realized that someone was Xiao Zhan. She had never hated him. Not even once. But she had hated how easily he had become Yibo'S home, when she was still learning how to become her own. Now, none of it mattered. All that mattered was that he survived. Inside, Xiao Zhan rested his head on the mattress, still holding Yibo'S hand. His voice now just a whisper. You can rest. But don't disappear. You can be tired. But don't give up. Please. And then, in the softest possible way, Wangibore's fingers moved again. A twitch. A curl. Then a soft squeeze. Xiao Zhan's breath caught in his throat. He looked up, eyes wide. And this time, he saw it. Wangibore's eyes slowly blinked open. The world stopped. Xiao Zhan stood quickly. He touched Yibo'S face. He whispered his name. Again and again. Yibor. Yibor. Can you hear me? I'm here. Wangibore's lips moved. No sound. But unmistakable motion. He said Zhan. Xiao Zhan laughed through his tears. Collapsed into the edge of the bed, holding onto the hand that still had life. Outside, Shinyu returned just in time to hear the commotion. She opened the door, saw the monitors spike, saw Xiao Zhan weeping, and knew what had happened. She walked in, stood at the edge of the bed, smiled. Welcome back, she whispered. Wangibore's head turned, just slightly, eyes barely able to focus. But he saw her. And for the first time since the collapse, there was something in his expression. Recognition. Peace. Doctors came rushing in. They asked Xiao Zhan to step aside. To give them space. He did. But not before kissing Yibo'S forehead. And whispering. I'll be just outside. I promise. Shinyu sat with him in the hallway, neither speaking for a while. Then she said. You loved him through everything. And he came back to you. Xiao Zhan nodded. I had no other choice. 3 days later, Wangibore was transferred to a recovery room. Still weak. Still quiet. But awake. The media waited outside. The world was watching. But inside those walls, in that tiny room, there was no fandom. No fame. No fear. Just a man waking up. To the people who never stopped waiting for him, the room was quieter now. But not with fear. This time it was peace. The kind of stillness that comes when pain begins to shift into healing. The machines still beeped softly. The 4 still hung beside the bed. But something had changed. Wangibore was awake. His eyes were half open. Heavy with exhaustion. But they were open. And when they met Xiao Zhan's for the second time that morning, they didn't look through him. They looked at him. Truly at him. Xiao Zhan sat at the edge of the bed again, his hand resting gently on Yibo'S arm, and though he tried to smile, he was shaking too much to manage it. You came back, he whispered. You really came back. Yibor blinked. Tried to lift his hand again. Failed. But his lips parted. A faint sound escaped. Rough. Broken. But real. Zhan. One word. One syllable. And Xiao Zhan's heart nearly exploded. He leaned forward. Pressed his forehead gently against Yibo'S. I never left. I never will. The doctors asked Xiao Zhan to step out after a few minutes. They needed to run more scans. Check his vitals. Make sure the brief moment of consciousness wasn't just a flicker. Xiao Zhan stood reluctantly. Let go of Yibo'S hand. But as he turned to leave, he heard it again. Soft. Barely audible. Stay. It was the most complete word Yibo' had said yet. And it broke something inside Xiao Zhan all over again. He nodded. I'm not going anywhere. Outside the room, Shen Yue was waiting. She had stepped aside earlier, not wanting to overwhelm the moment. But now, as she stood by the window, her hands were clenched tightly in front of her. Xiao Zhan walked over, tears still drying on his face. He's awake, he said gently. Still weak. Still barely speaking. But awake. Shinyu exhaled. Looked down. Then up at him. I saw it. I heard him. They stood in silence. The weight of everything still resting on their shoulders. But something between them had shifted too. No longer rivals. No longer strangers. Just two people who had nearly lost the same person. A few hours later, after more scans and observations, Wangibore was moved to a quieter recovery room. His monitors were adjusted. His medications were stabilized. He still had difficulty moving. He still could not speak clearly. But his eyes followed everyone. And when Xiao Zhan sat beside him again, he reached weakly for his hand. It was a slow process. Doctors warned that his memory may be spotty. His emotions unpredictable. His speech delayed. But none of that mattered to Xiao Zhan. What mattered was that he was here. That he was alive. And that for the first time in days, the machines were no longer his only link to hope. Back at home, their daughter had been told the good news. Xiao Zhan's sister had recorded her reaction. A tiny scream of joy. A dance around the living room. A drawing of stars and hearts and her family. Xiao Zhan watched the video from the hospital room. Then showed it to Yibo', who blinked slowly as if absorbing each frame. He turned his head toward Xiao Zhan. Tried to speak. But couldn't. So instead, he squeezed his hand twice. And that was enough. The outside world had not been quiet. News of Yibo'S collapse had already gone viral. Speculation filled every platform. From messages of love to hateful theories. From fans begging for updates to former colleagues issuing shallow statements of support. The most controversial of all was a short clip that had begun to circulate. A blurry hospital hallway. A distant shot of Xiao Zhan holding Yibo'S hand as he spoke to him softly. It had clearly been filmed by someone inside the hospital. And now, it was everywhere. Xiao Zhan saw it on someone's phone as he walked to the vending machine. He froze. Stared. Then returned to the room in silence. He did not show Yibo'. He did not tell Shen Yue. But his chest burned with quiet fury. That evening, Shen Yue returned with a small bag. Inside were letters, photos, and a USB drive. She sat beside Xiao Zhan in the hallway. The two of them looking out through the glass at the city lights. I never told him everything, she said. I never got the chance. Maybe I was waiting for the right moment. Maybe I was just afraid of being replaced. But now, I just want him to know that he mattered to me. Even when I was angry. Even when I disappeared. She handed Xiao Zhan the bag. Please. Give this to him when he's stronger. Not now. But when the time is right. Xiao Zhan nodded. He placed the bag on his lap. And for the first time, touched her shoulder gently. Thank you for coming, he said. Thank you for not making this about the past. She smiled. Wiped her eyes. You two still love each other. It's obvious. But just know, there are others who love him too. And we're all praying for the same thing.